All right, good to see everybody face to face. Talk louder? Louder. I think we need the mic up a little bit. Is that better? I talk kind of loud too, so there we go. Good? All right, excellent. Welcome, good to see everybody. As much as we can see you with the lights in our eyes, but it's good to be back in person. It's pretty busy considering it's Monday and it's 11:45, so we're glad you came out. Appreciate it, thank you. Well, my name is Alex Haynes. I'm with our business development group.
And I'm Matt Cooper. I'm our Vice President of Global Sales and Applications.
And we're here today to talk about automation ROI. And really the key to this presentation is going through a little bit of what we all know, and those are some of the pressures that are facing all of us and why we're here. And also some of the things that are changing in terms of the traditional ROI calculation. And as these change, what's the right option for your business? Whether it's small, medium, high, we're going to give you a little bit of a flavor for some projects that we've done and kind of how we assess with our customers where the trade-offs are in the ROI from both a quantitative and a qualitative standpoint. So our agenda. So what are the market pressures to automate? So some of the things, like I said, we know, and some of the things that we're starting to see in some of the market trends. And these are going to be a little bit more retail specific, and some of these trends will apply to across multiple industries, but there's going to be a little bit more of a tinge of retail. And then how to properly assess your data and then determine which automation fits your business needs. So which automation will make sense, either low, medium, or high, and how does that process look? And what are those variables you need to weigh to make that decision? And then we'll give you some examples, some case studies of customers who've gone and run the spectrum. Quick, easy to implement, low automation to high automation. All right, so kind of a wordy chart, and somewhat intentional here, but changes in consumer expectations. And I think a couple of interesting call outs. So obviously, from a retail side, we know that e-commerce is on an incredible trajectory, but in 2022, we're projecting this year to be the first $1 trillion year in e-commerce. And what's interesting is, for approximately every $1 billion of incremental e-commerce sales, we need about another 1.25 million square feet of warehouse space. So if you do the quick math and you look at how many retail dollars were generated in 2021 versus what we're projecting in 2022, we roughly need about an additional 84 million square feet of warehousing space in 2022. You know, and spoiler alert, it's not there. So we're fighting for space. We need more space, we're building more space, but it's not enough. So we're continuing to see these logistics and warehousing developments everywhere, right? Especially in dense areas such as the Midwest, West Coast, East Coast hubs, Dallas, for example, where warehouses are coming and popping up everywhere. You may have distribution centers in these locations. And the challenge is there's a fight for space right now, but there's also competition for labor, as everybody knows. And I think the question is, if you have an operation in these locations, you may have good, people metrics today, you may have solid and low attrition rates, but what's that going to look like when there's 2, 3, 4, 5 more distribution centers that open up down the street from you? Because they're going to. They're going to continue to expand, and that demand for labor that you may have a pretty good control on now will continue to slip. For just an example, a quick call out, maybe some of you have heard of what's called the World Logistics Center. It's about a $3 billion investment in Southern California, Moreno Valley, for 40 million square foot of warehousing space. So that's how serious people are taking this change to the need for additional space due to the drive in e-com. So what if you don't automate? So kind of a quick call out here. Amazon is easy to reference. So Modux has us send in these slides early, so I can't make too many changes. So it says Q4, Amazon expects net sales between 130 and 140 billion and operating income in between 0 and 3 billion. This isn't a way to call out Amazon negatively, it's just a call out for the leader in the market. And so actually their Q4 revenue was $137 billion, and their operating income decreased to $3.5 billion in the fourth quarter when you compare that to $6.9 billion in the fourth quarter of 2020. And if you take a look at the numbers related to the fulfillment and the online shopping business, the US segment recorded $206 million in operating losses, and the international side lost $1.6 billion. So Amazon is basically saying, look, it's expensive for us in the short term, but it's the right prioritization for our customers and partners. And what they mean by that is they're investing in people. You guys know they're driving the minimum wage. They're leading the market in terms of automation and investments and capital investments, and they're putting huge amounts of money into their people and into their processes, and it's costing them. So it's kind of an interesting bellwether to look at and say, these are the companies who've helped drive a lot of this change, and we all know that, and they're looking at this saying, we're not only investing in people, but we're investing heavily in automation. So overall, if they're feeling the pressure, then we're feeling the pressure. So I'm going to hand it over to Matt here to talk about some of the variables.
So we want to talk a little bit about ROI. And if you think about what return on investment really is, it is the amount you're saving over the cost that you are investing. And traditionally, it used to be thought of as how much labor am I saving? So you looked at the investment, it saved 3 heads, you would make your calculation and you want to see a payback in 24 months or less, maybe 36 months. But I don't know if you guys are experiencing this too, but I think everybody's trying to hire people right now. I don't know a single distribution center, a single manufacturer that doesn't have help wanted signs out. Bastian Solutions is looking to hire people like crazy as well, right? So it's all about trying to find people. Whereas before you said, I don't want to have as many people. Now the ROI needs to be calculated like, I can't find the people. So how do I find more people to fulfill these roles? Additionally, we would look at ROI and say, well, we're going to say maybe a 1 or 2% increase in the overall cost of a person, their fully burdened cost. But in 2020, we saw over 4% increase. Again, the slides aren't quite up to date, but 2021 was more than that, and we're going to continue to see that trend over the next at least 12, if not 24 to 36 months. So as you're starting to calculate your return, you need to make sure that you're growing that fully burdened cost for your employees out to an appropriate level. Additionally, as we're trying to hire, we're not only trying to hire for new work, we're also trying to hire for the turnover. And what we're seeing is people just no call, no show. A lot of operators are seeing people go out for lunch and not come back, right? And as Alex kind of mentioned, all these warehouses are popping up, but that's creating a huge demand for these workers, right? So just think about the cost to advertise, attract, hire, train. You're talking, one study said over $7,000 per employee that you have to hire. So we need to make sure as we are looking at what these ROI variables, you're including those kind of costs to make sure that whenever you're justifying automation, it makes a lot more sense. We talked a little bit about labor, but let's talk about space. Unfortunately, space is at an all-time low. As Alex mentioned, there's so much demand for building and we're not able to keep up. Costs per square foot are skyrocketing. We have seen almost 50% increase in cost per square foot in some areas. So the idea to automate to either stay in an existing space or to minimize that expansion is a very big ROI driver. I want to call it maybe cost avoidance, right? To look at not having to add on to your facility and build new space, or having to change facilities, sign a new lease at a much higher lease rate. So those are some good ways to look at when you're doing an ROI, exactly how much you can save and include that in your calculations. As we kind of round out some more ways to think about ROI and new factors to add into that, let's really think about the safety ergonomic aspect of what we do. Unfortunately, warehousing has some of the highest non-fatal injury rates in any industry, right? We do a lot of repetitive work. We do a lot of work holding or manipulating heavy or awkward objects, 8 hours, 10 hours a day, multiple shifts a day. So safety is a huge concern. And you think about workers' comp claims, you think about attrition and work that is not friendly to that operator, they're not going to want to stay around. So as you can automate, you can really think about and focus on ergonomics, an ergonomic pick station, for example, that really helps workers want to stay. and helps workers be the most successful that they can be. Also thinking about SLAs. I know that, before COVID, we talked about the Amazon effect and people wanting product next day in an e-commerce world. COVID has absolutely accelerated that to where people want stuff in same day, 2 hours, 15 minutes, right? And so to be able to change your business to accommodate these needs to grow your market is important. So automation with flexibility, you can't just throw labor at things anymore. So automation with flexibility and being able to grow that market, grow your market share, is another way to think about ROI and being able to grow your business. And lastly, to touch on more SKUs, touch on more orders, different types of channels, the way your customers are coming to market with you. Being able to automate those factors will help you become more and more successful. Go ahead and touch that. So now we're going to go back to Alex to talk a little about data and understand really how we can automate and determine what that return is.
All right, thanks, Matt. So we kind of talk about the automation maturity curve, and we'll get into how we look at, understand, review, and determine where you should land on the maturity curve, but it's pretty straightforward. On the low end, you have solutions that are quick to deploy and typically lower cost. The flip side to that are less labor savings, less space savings, and potentially higher safety risk. If I look on the other end of the spectrum, I see high automation. Those take longer to deploy, they're going to cost more, and there's more complexity in terms of execution. On the flip side, you have higher labor savings, higher space savings, improved safety and ergonomics, better SLAs, and improved quality. It doesn't mean everybody should land on one end of the spectrum or the other end of the spectrum. I'm just calling out there are two ends of the spectrum and they need to be assessed. But typically what you're going to see here, traditional automation, conveyance, pick to belt, sortation, flow racking, things of that nature. Modern automation, you go conveyance systems with pick modules, some downstream sortation, pick to light, vision, put wall, systems that are around for decades. And then we have standalone point solutions, which kind of fall in between. You're seeing a lot of these. So it's the AMRs, it's the AGVs. How can those operate without a lot of other automation interacting with them? Those are typically quicker to deploy, lower cost, and sometimes you can lease them or treat them as a robot as a service, for example. And there's typically a lot faster to deploy. And then you've got the advanced automation solutions. And that's really a combination of all these things, highly integrated systems, lowest touches, largest amount of space savings. So how much should you automate? That's the million-dollar question. So there's some key variables that you need to think about and understand as you look at this assessment. You need to first take an evaluation analysis of your data and fully understand what is your current business and what is your growth trajectory. It sounds pretty straightforward, but it's pretty challenging for a lot of customers, even over the past 12 months, to have a good assessment of what their existing business looks like, especially because things have changed, at a pretty high rate. And then you need to weight all these ROI variables we talked about. So how do you want to weight these? You're going to have the quantitative metrics we talked about, such as improved productivity, which is less headcount, space savings, or new space requirement mitigation. So, can I add more SKUs? Can I produce more volume in the footprint that I have? Those are the more easily quantifiable variables, and you need to weight those accordingly. What we're seeing now is customers putting a lot more weight in the calculation to the qualitative metrics. So for example, the requirements for improved SLA. So we're seeing systems invest huge amounts of money for peak season, which typically could have been supplemented with manual labor. And now they're saying, hey, if I don't get that service and my customers aren't receiving these products within a couple of days after Black Friday, my loss isn't the sale that year, it's the future loss of the sale to that customer who didn't get what they expected in a quick turnaround time. And the tolerance on the SLAs has become so much more than I think a lot of people fully understand. And so the weighting for that particular ROI variable has become a lot heavier than it has in the past. And then ergonomics is becoming a continued improvement. A lot of the customers we work with, small nuanced changes to ergonomics, bin sizes, how much rotation do I have if I'm at a picking station. All these things are becoming a lot more weighted in the equation because employees will walk away. My back hurts slightly after doing a little bit of this work, I'm going to the next place down the street. So higher weighting on that. And safety is another big one. Like Matt mentioned as well, we're seeing the opportunity for people to get out of the warehousing space. Why work somewhere where I at least, if I have a minimum, a perception that I work in an unsafe environment? So all of these are gaining a lot more traction. We're having meetings now where the people from the ergonomics and the safety groups, the EHS groups, they are coming and having a significant impact on the decision-making process. So I think when you look at all this, it's not so easy just to say, hey, I need to do something and it better pay off in 24 months and show me the math. It's what are these other variables? What if you don't do it? So that's kind of the point we're driving home. And then after customers look at these metrics, they'll say, okay, well, maybe I'm going to change my capital allocation plan. Maybe I can allocate more capital because I'm weighting these variables differently. And then also they're looking at different leasing options. There's leasing options now on larger automated equipment. You can do robots as a service, similar to like software as a service. There's a lot more flexibility in terms of the way to finance these deals as well. All right, so determining the right solution, it's a little bit of what I was saying, not one size fits all. There's not one piece of technology that's going to work for everybody. And so there's really an assessment that needs to happen through the data analysis. I'll just go into a tiny bit more detail, but essentially there are 4 steps to determining what your right solution is. 1, your data analysis, understand your product profiles today and tomorrow, which projects are going to grow, which ones are going to decline, which projects are you going to introduce, your SKU profile, your mix, looking at your inventory snapshots throughout various points in the year. How do your demand patterns behave through peak times, slow times, all sorts of different variables throughout the year which are going to drive your demand. And then volatility of SKUs throughout the year. And then what are your overall throughput requirements? Number 2, you need to then build a baseline, a manual baseline. Well, if I don't do anything, what's going to happen? I'm going to have this many people, I'm going to have this much growth, it's going to require this much space, I'm going to have this much activity, I'm going to have this much motion, I'm going to have this much risk potentially associated with ergonomics and safety and movement and all these factors. And then you need to start building alternatives. That's step 3. So you're going to typically, if we do a solution and an assessment with the customer, we typically look at what we call small or low, a medium, and a high automation, and we'll work with the customer to go through that analysis together and to look at the trade-offs for each of those scenarios to understand, where do I fall on the spectrum, and then really building the ROI together. We can do a lot of the work, but the customers know their business best. So putting together a solution that combines all those, you're going to land somewhere on that maturity curve. All right, Matt's going to now speak to some examples of small and medium automation projects.
So our first small project, or small automation or lower automation project example is Yamato. So they had an existing facility, a lot of batch picking, going to like manual put walls at the end of their batch pick. The question was, how can we better improve the facility and get more product out the door with the smallest amount of investment and see that really good return? So they used the OPEX SureSort as a way to automate the put wall, and that's the backbone of what they changed in their facility. By adding that OPEX SureSort, they took labor out of that put wall. They saw increased accuracy and increased speed in breaking those batch picks down to the individual order level. So what this really did was allow them to remove some labor, or technically not hire additional labor, and it's a very expandable system, and they can expand the system including more iBots or additional aisles of the SureSort system. There are other ways to do this, different technologies like the Tompkins T-Sort. It's a very similar idea, using robots on a tabletop, and then those robots are driving around depositing the eaches to the correct orders. You can double stack them. One of the benefits of the Tompkins T-Sort is it's very modular, very easy to install, and very easy to reconfigure and move around your warehouse.
Hey Matt, sorry, just to jump in real quick. I see our video's kind of cut on a truncated loop here.
It is, isn't it?
So yeah, if you guys want to see the technologies, they're down here at the show. So SureSort is OPEX and T-Sort is out there. Sorry about that.
Another example of lower automation or small automation is micro-fulfillment in general. So this example is actually in a retail store in Calgary, Canada. It is the Decathlon store, and it's an actual retail outlet where we go to shop. They use the AutoStore technology in the store where individuals shopping are actually using the Decathlon app on their phone. And in the actual store, they have examples of the different apparel items. It's a sporting goods store, different sporting goods accessories. And they basically go through and scan and order things as they're walking through the store. And then, when they're done, they click submit. And in the background, the AutoStore robots are digging that inventory out. There's a decathlon worker that's picking it out of the AutoStore bins, putting it into the order bin. And then the order bin will eventually go to a front-end worker who will then double check to make sure everything's correct and put it in a bag and hand it to a client. So if you think about ROI here, not only are they able to store more SKUs than they could otherwise in the store, they also have the interest or wow factor to drive foot traffic into the store to see robots on top of a grid getting their product in the middle of a day. They also use this as a dual purpose system, so you can do the buy online, pick up in store, and they'll fulfill orders out of that. Or e-commerce can also be fulfilled out of this and is shipped from this facility. It's a really interesting way. We actually have this system on the second floor in a mall. And then you can kind of see in the rendering behind there is actually a window. So from the parking lot, you can actually see the AutoStore robots moving around on the grid. It really does present that wow factor to the retailers. In addition to this smaller automation inside a store, you can also employ this in the back room of a store, where maybe it's not a focal point of the customer experience, but you're able to gain that higher density of storage and more product in the store, and you're also to be able to more quickly fulfill customer orders. We could also do this in a dark store, and that allows you to be able to, let's say, do grocery and ship to many more people, different customers. And as we kind of advance on the automation levels, this is kind of the medium automation. This is an example with Southern Glazer's Wine and Spirits. Obviously, as their name implies, they are a wholesaler in the wine and spirits industry. We've done more than 15 sites with Southern Glazer's over our time working with them. I call this more traditional material handling, and it is definitely a larger investment, but what this allows them to do is to take these cases and ship them out to their various customers. Most of what goes out is full case. It is primarily going to bars, retail outlets, restaurants, and we employ kind of traditional rack pick modules, so pick from pallet, put onto belt, conveyance, and high-speed sortation. So they experience a great ROI with this type of system. This system alone shipping over 25 million cases of wine and spirits in a year. And what they can really do is utilize software to help them pick in correct waves, because what they're actually doing is they're picking to their routes. And then as we pick the product out of the pick modules, we're conveying it, sorting it to the individual route trucks in a reverse stop sequence, right? So the first order on the truck is the last delivery they're going to make for the day. And so we are very accurately picking the right products in the right sequences, building stacks in the truck so they can make those deliveries and be as efficient as possible when they're at that bar or restaurant. So we use our Exacta WCS and WES to control that type of system and that type of automation.
All right, so I'm trying to get away from distribution here a little bit and talk about some other industries. So manufacturing, we're calling this a medium automation application. But this is an 850,000 square foot facility. It's Rubbermaid products. They're being assembled. It's a kitting process. It's a box, and this operation had 15 to 20 operators prior to automation. And really, the investment here was to focus on increasing productivity, improving consistency, and shipping more accurate. So they were having issues with quality control as well as throughput. And so the idea was to put in place essentially a robotic kitting operation. And so we've got 10 FANUC robots, essentially 10 different kitting lines. These kitting lines can actually be kitting multiple products. So depending on whatever the recipe calls for that particular carton, the robot will grab with its end of arm tooling, the however many pieces of Tupperware are required. There's essentially like a sort of a pre-space that's created. The robots grab, they place, and then if they need to switch out tooling, they can do that on the fly to handle a different type of product as the recipe changes. We call this medium automation because really this is kind of an isolated solution. So we have employees who are now doing more ergonomic tasks, and there are fewer employees, and they're inducting the product into the system, as you can see right here. They induct, the robotics build the kit, and the system comes out. The products come out, they're in a box, they're automatically taped, they're labeled, and they're shipped off. And so what this has done essentially is it's enabled better accuracy, lower operating expenses, improved ergonomics, and while this may appear to be a little bit higher automation, this actually was a relatively quicker to deploy system than some of the larger, more integrated systems you'll see. All right, so high automation. So Puma is a case where we have a couple of sites we've done for Puma, but this is a fully integrated goods-to-person system for an omni-channel retail and apparel. So they're shipping shoes as well as shipping apparel and accessories out of this site. So omni-channel, shipping to both retailers as well as shipping to end users and customers. And so I'll just do a quick kind of walkthrough of the site to give you a feel for it. Essentially, products come in, they're received on inbound conveyance. They can be received directly inside the auto store. So there's an automated case opener. Boxes will hit the automated case opener. The employees will receive the box. They essentially can dump the entire tote, if necessary, into an open tote, induct it directly into the system. Boxes can also be routed for pallet build. The pallet build is then taken and put into reserve racking. From there, from the outbound side, cartons are automatically erected by carton erection machines, and then those go inside the tunnel of the auto store. There's a multi-layer conveyance system that has multiple size boxes as well as totes. The operators are informed which box size they need to grab in order to know, based on whatever the product cube is. They'll put those boxes at the picking station. It's a 1 to 2 pick. You can see it on the video right there. So they're picking to these destination totes. And then from there, the boxes are then taken away on conveyor that's directly in front of the operator. They go downstream if no additional value-added services are required. There's an automated lid that's put on top of these. There's a print and apply machine, puts a shipping label on, and they're sent down for fluid load on some extendable. So the point here is high automation but low touches. On the inbound side, you might have one touch from an operator inducting it. On the outbound side, you might have one operator touch, that's it. It's putting the product into the box, pushing it on the conveyor, that's it. They don't touch it again until it's loaded into the trailer. So highly automated. There's also an auto bagging system on the other side of this, on the south side of the drawing here. And that auto bagging system is set up to stack multiple apparel layers. It goes away on conveyance. That conveyance automatically bags it. It hits an interlock sorter, diverts it to whatever the shipping gaylord needs to be. So highly automated. And what you'll notice here, what a lot of customers are doing, is they're asking us to design for future expansion. So you can see here it says planned expansion space. We're actually in the middle of expanding right now, and all that racking space is gone. So what we'll do is planning for this future growth. If it's uncertain, you may want to allocate some of that space with either things that are easier to move or frankly nothing at all, and we'll grow into that space in the future. And a lot of people are asking for flexibility. And even on capital intensive and really rigid fixture systems, like an example for an auto store, we actually built this grid out about halfway. So the grid was it was built out fully from a structural standpoint, so aluminum framing was built out. But once we needed to grow the business, which we're in the process of doing, we essentially are adding in more ports, adding in more conveyor, adding more robots, and adding more bins. So this allows to expand over time as necessary and add in that capital when your business requires it. So this one I spent a little more time on because there's a lot of interesting takeaways. And the last one, so this is cold storage 3PL, high automation. A little bit more of a unique application and use case here, but this is a fully integrated, highly automated, high bay warehouse. And so this system is a 140-foot tall rack-supported building. It's all temperature controlled. There's a cooler, dock, and then there's a freezer storage system, 47,000 pallet locations. This system has a large Swiss log unit load storage system as well as a shuttle system. So essentially the unit load system will go into the aisle, it'll retrieve a full pallet, and that is stored then in the power store shuttle system at the end of the tower. Pallets are brought down, Those pallets come out in a trolley system. There is a gantry layer system that will take off a layer at a time, so picking each layer, and then it feeds a descrambler, descrambles the cartons. Those hit an outbound pallet build location. So really, this process is highly, highly automated, lots of various technologies, high throughput, and very high capital requirements. So you're talking about, a project that takes a lot longer, higher capital requirements, but on the flip side, you've maximized space utilization, you're using your vertical space as much as possible, you're lowering your energy costs. It's important. The site's actually in Atlanta. So when you have a space that's going to be consuming a lot of energy and a lot of HVAC, it's much more economical to go vertical in this aspect. And then we have minimal touches, especially important in a freezer environment. Minimal touches are important for everybody, but especially in a temperature-controlled environment where labor is higher and people don't want to work, frankly. So this is the other end of the spectrum, highly automated, highly capital intense, longer ROI period, but for quite a few variables. So I think that's all the content we have. Hopefully we gave you some good things to think about and chew on. And now we've got a few minutes for questions.
Have you considered energy in your ROI calculations? And I know for freezing and cold storage, it's really, really meaningful. But just in general, is there a heavier cost or cost to be mindful of for the energy required to run these robotics?
There was a question around energy consumption, around robotics, and is that like a key variable in ROIs? So great question. We do, whenever we go through a design and analysis, there is always an energy consumption that we usually put in ahead of time and provide with the GC so they can then build out the correct infrastructure for whatever the energy requirements are. That's not a question that comes up that often in terms of how does this play into my ROI? Am I reducing my energy needs? Am I saving on energy? Depending on the system, some of these are very low energy consumption. So for example, AutoStore, I'm trying to think, I'm probably gonna get myself in trouble if I quote what the energy usage is, but typically it's not anywhere near what you would see in some like a large shuttle-based system, so a lot lower energy consumption. There's more of a focus on it, I would say probably in the past year, but that's something that comes up terribly often, but we'll do those calculations. Why don't I bring this up? I'm just gonna walk out here and give you this mic because I don't see a community mic.
What were some of the ROIs on the projects that you had here, and what are you seeing companies start to accept as far as ROIs?
Did you hear that?
Yeah. So what are some of the ROIs on some of the projects? It really varies by customer. So what we're seeing is I'm seeing anywhere from 12 months through about 5 years on some of these projects. And again, like we talked about, it used to be labor and really looking at how much labor you're saving. You want to do it in 24 months. But it has really, I've seen a lot of change in just the viewpoint of ROI, and it's not quite as important if you can't get product out the door. And when I say it's not important, meaning it's not important to be within like a 24-month time frame. So we're seeing some of these larger projects have sometimes in that 5-year range.
I was going to say too, we actually had a customer who told us that they increased their labor wage rate over the next several years more than they initially had planned because they figured that labor was going to become so hard for them to acquire. They wanted to basically justify their business case a couple of years earlier, and they even said, we're just willing to assume we're going to be paying an extra 10, 20, 30% in labor. So in some of these higher systems that you used to see ROIs in 7 to 10 years, and some of that now is coming down to based on the geo, even below 7 years on some of these very high automated. But I would say in general, like we are definitely seeing a lot more in the 3 to 4 year range that are getting traction than previously did. Anybody else? Okay. Thank you all.
Thank you very much.